Well, hello and welcome. And today we are looking at the fallouts from Brexit, its effect on Ghana. Those of you at home thinking, what French is he talking about? Brexit? It's Britain exiting from the European Union. Now, once upon a time, there was a very gallant black man who indeed was Ghanaian. And he sat and he thought that, listen, there was no need in me just governing my just little country along the coast. I need to spread my wings and get the whole of the continent to come together, and that I will tap into everybody's might and I will also become big. And that was Kwame Nkrumah. And he sat down and wrote a detailed policy as to how Africa should come together and become, instead of a continent, probably just one huge country. And they had plans, railways crossing, power lines, and indeed, it would have been next to heaven. Apart from heaven, there wouldn't have been anything in this space that would have been so rich than the African continent. Then the Organization of African Unity was formed, and probably the only thing they could decide at the meetings was when the next meeting would be formed. Apart from that, our borders are closed, we don't trade with each other, we don't trust each other. But somewhere along the line in the 70s, I haven't read it, but I am told that if you read the EU convention, some of the words and paragraphs are letter to letter, just like what Nkrumah wrote. It is believed that they copied the idea, but let's come together and form a strong union. So in 1973, UK joined. And just last week, a few days ago, they decided, you know what, and the implications are just too much. I don't understand it. So I have two thespians of international affairs here who I will introduce after the break to explain to us what the repercussions are going to be. My name is Nana Ansakwa the Fourth, Akwamuedu Masahine, and also your host. When I come back, we are talking Brexit. Don't move. Thank you very much for staying, and we are looking at fallout from Brexit, its effect on Ghana. Just a little history about it. In 1957, the Treaty of Rome was signed by 6 European states. In 1967, the European Community was established. And in 1973, Britain joined the European Community, and the Tory Prime Minister, Edward Heath, then took the show. But if it's the first time we're tuning in, it's one of Ghana's young, gallant, sharp brains. Ibad, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Nana. Thanks for having me.
And Dr. Vladimir Enchidan. So if you don't know him, it means you haven't arrived in Ghana that long. You are still excused.
You're on the Togolese border.
But as far as international affairs and security is concerned, he is an authority. Doctor, you're welcome.
Thank you so much.
And I keep telling you, Nana, anytime Doctor is on the show, then I'm your co-host.
Oh, come on.
Because I have to do a lot of listening to take notes. Yeah, so I'm privileged once again, sir.
Right.
Yeah.
Doc, let me start by saying, would you have voted in or voted out?
Obviously, the whole world would have voted in, and I was expecting to vote in, actually. I had been interviewed by some media houses, and I had stated clearly that it is unprecedented, and therefore I wasn't expecting the Brits to vote leave. That countries where such a situation had happened, like Canada and other places, it never was, and therefore this time they would stay in. I was wrong. But later on, in a post-Brexit analysis, I cannot understand why exactly.
They vote to stay.
Exactly.
However, Iba, there were people who were interviewed. Anyway, would you have voted in or out?
I would have voted in.
Okay, there were people who they interviewed after one person said, I didn't think my vote was going to count. It was just me. It was just me, and I don't think my vote was going to count.
The Brits themselves were taken by storm.
Sure.
Because nobody could fathom out that a pivotal bloc within the EU, like Great Britain, would opt out. Everybody knows the kind of ramifications such a thing would have. So therefore, even though the leadership of Labour, Lib Dems as well. It was only Nigel Farage, the leader of the UKIP, and that was pushing for this. And I think he should be abashed by this time, because some of the Brits were beguiled into thinking that this was the best option for them. The repercussions will carry on for a long time to come.
Security. UK is part of NATO.
Sure.
So if the Americans come and they need to sit on the table, so they sit with UK and then they sit with EU, or they sit together, how does this arrangement work?
Well, the exit of Britain doesn't mean that any kind of organization will also have to splinter. The point is that, yes, NATO, America is part of NATO, and therefore it's outside the EU anyway. So it's like EU as one unit, Britain and America, kind of. That's what is going to happen. So nothing would change in those organizations. It's a matter of reorganization, realignment. The treaties will not go away, because in those treaties there are clauses that allow for exit and entry. So there's nothing that's going to change in NATO philosophy, NATO foreign policy, or whatever it is. Nothing is going to change. It is their relationship with Britain that is now going to be not a cagey one, but it's like they're going to allow Britain to have their own foreign policy for all the policies that Britain, EU had, for example, common agricultural policy, common foreign policy, common, all those migration policies and that sort of thing. Britain will have a right to have all those things, but it doesn't change what Europe stood for and still would stand for.
And the caveat, I'm sure Doc has, sounded that note of caution, is that this is not automatic. The EU does not operate in a vacuum. It has a working document, and that is called the Treaty of Lisbon. So when you look at Article 50, it says when you spark off a secessionist intention as a country, it takes at least 2 years. So for Ghanaians that are bogus in London and Birmingham, people are so apprehensive. Yeah, so
until Britain itself triggers, seals for the exit. In fact, the vote has come, but there are steps to take for it to take effect.
To trigger the Article 50.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So there is still some aperture, and Doc, we've come to love this word. There is an aperture of opportunity for people to lace their boats and know where they bank their fate. So fundamentally, from now to 2018, the migration laws are going to become much more draconian. It becomes much easier now to go to the UK than it will be when the UK severs ties with the rest of the EU. And by extension, they felt they were being strangulated by the influx of migrants from Eastern Europe, because London is the hub of global commerce. So therefore, there was gentrification. Londoners were being pushed from the center of town because people came in with bigger bucks and they could afford accommodation. So I think the Brits are suffering from an identity crisis. And when South Africa happened, I used the same cliche. UK people are not used to being told what to do. People who ruled half of the world are not used to being bossed around. They are used to bossing people around. So for a tiny capital like Brussels, when I say like when we say Accra or Washington, then we represent the country. The decision makers are in London. So therefore, fundamentally, I think, Nana, we won't see an immediate, impact. It will come over time. But that does not shred into pieces already existing treaties we've ratified, just as Doc has alluded to. So for me, it comes as a surprise, and repercussions will come. I won't be surprised if there is a repeat of the 7/7 bombings, because other countries will be looking askance at Europe. Even with cooperation under the umbrella of EU, Paris was attacked, Brussels was attacked. Other parts of the UK are against the secession.
Sure. Scotland, for example.
Scotland is against it.
They were in
no,
today to see
the irony.
How do we keep our relationship?
The paradox of this episode is when Scotland wanted to break away from the rest of the UK, London, rallied everybody to vote in. So if domestically you believe in unity, then continent-wide, I think it's a double standard.
Doc, you see, there's this human rights policy within the UK, which really sidelines the taxpayer. So, Doc, it could be like you, hard-working professor, everything, and maybe for one reason or the other, you're unable to work again. And the UK has all these benefit systems.
That's right.
So you turn up at the benefit shop, but, Halidu has turned up with his 2 wives and 12 kids. He is a priority over you. Right. Automatically. Yes. So this made, created a lot of resentment that, hold on, I've been working all my life. It's only the last 2 weeks I had an accident and I need help. But he said, no, Halidu arrived yesterday. He's got 2 wives. And true to that fact, there's this guy who, they broke 2 apartments, put it together because he had a large family.
Wow.
So there's a taxpayer who's worked all his life, but because he's in the UK, the guy who arrives today as a refugee, supersedes. You take your son to school and they say, there are no places because Halidu's kids are here, so we would. So I think, you see, all these things created some xenophobic thing in the. So you listen to people who are saying no, and all they're saying, oh, they are coming here taking our job, they are taking our houses. That's all they are saying. The bourgeoisies didn't care because nobody's going to take their job.
Right. You're very right. Analyzing the Brexit, you wouldn't put it to a monocausal kind of thing. It's not necessarily that they just want to get out of Europe, but most of the things we are saying. Soros, for example, today brought out a piece in which he was saying that migration was the center of, or the trigger point. Just as my brother said, Ebar said, the influx of refugees and for Brussels to sort of say, let's share, and kind of things like Brussels is dictating the immigration kind of rules and that sort of regulations and or philosophy. If you contradict the philosophy, you get whatever it is. Here were 6 countries that started it all.
Yes, Doc.
Contiguous countries putting their economies together, exploit synergies in order to create a larger market.
Yes, Doc.
On and on and on, they became 15, a stable 15-member EU. The stable currencies, stronger currencies than any other currency around the world that time. Then all of a sudden, the collapse of the Soviet Union and communism created an urge to sort of expand and expand. And that expansion created a condition for the Romanians, the Bulgarians, the Polish, and everybody just rushing. And like Ibar said, London being the center of the world, call it. Everybody wanted to be in London rather than today it's Germany because Germany opened their arms and say, come in. So all these things built up gradually. And like you rightly said, in the 90s, it was very difficult. 1993, Britain were down seriously, reeling under economic downturns and whatnot. And that was the time the debate came on very seriously, especially in 1993. I remember very well Gordon Brown was in Brussels at a meeting when he was sacked as the Chancellor of the Exchequer, kind of. All these things, and the British people just felt that it is because of something alien to their system that is creating the condition for their downturn in their economy. On and on and on, the ISIS problem and whatnot, and now again. So there are several causes that created the condition for kind of nationalism. And I believe, as Soros has said today, when people are voting on nationalistic grounds, there's no logic. So they may have voted, but they wouldn't even look at the consequences. Because there were several other research from the OECD, from the World Bank, the IMF, all warning that the consequences would be dire. But they didn't listen to that. And again, I think David Cameron made a big mistake of causing the referendum to come at this point in time when Europe is hiccuping seriously. When nationalistic feelings are who also
Boris Johnson, a radical guy,
who also cause people to get out and that. And you could see that the campaign was very bad campaign. Based on lies and kind of this thing, all kinds of things.
This amount that
so sentimental
that it paid to the EU, there was 10 million, 300 million, 30 million. There was never a particular figure.
The reality check will dawn on the Brits later. So sometimes you take a decision. It's just like divorcing your wife on the spell of the moment. Later, you remember, hey, I was the best under the sun. So sometimes it happens like that. But let's be fair to the Brits. Nana, Ghanaians by nature are averse to having our jobs, our housing taken by foreigners. We aren't comfortable currently. Gutag is up in arms because people are taking their jobs. But in the UK and other, first world countries, you have a corporation like Multimedia. The cameraman is Chinese. The floor cleaner is from Mexico. So it's natural. In Ghana, even in certain geographical areas, people who don't fall within the ethnic group are not allowed to integrate well. So therefore, if you have outsiders take over some of the opportunities that are meant for you, just as you've indicated, welfare, insurance, and all that, let's save them some flack. Because sometimes you don't want people to come in.
No, but excuse me, but those things happen only when there is an economic downturn.
Look,
if the economy is fine, nobody cares.
I'll come back. There's so much because we're going to look at immigration. We're going to look at Cali. So what's going to happen to Cali now? Because all those guys behind the barrier in Cali are hoping to come.
To enter.
UK never opened its borders anyway, and they stuck to their pound. So moving forward, what's going to happen? And then we look at Ghana, the EPA. What happens to it? Do we sign now, or now do we have a stronger arm to say, well, if there's no EU, you can take your paper and shove it somewhere. We'll come straight back. Well, thank you very much for staying, and we are looking at the biggest story globally now is that after 43 years, UK decides, look, I'm coming out. I mean, if I bring it home, it's like Ghana waking up one day and say, you know what, we don't want to be part of the EU anymore. We just want to be on our own. I don't know what difference that would make anyway.
And I think, Nana, you gave a very interesting historical antecedent and the fact that the EU drew inspiration from the AU. But the AU currently, in our contemporary times, has been learning from best practices in the EU. So my fear is this could spark off a domino effect. Already Morocco is geographically with us, but not part of the AU.
That's right.
So if every country, mind you, the Great Britain is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It's a nuclear-armed nation, one of the foremost countries of the world. So if it decides on isolationism, protectionism, and secessionism, if care is not taken in quite a subtle way, other countries may be forced, coerced, or lured into breaking away. So the AU may have its own challenges. Don't be surprised if referenda are held and people want to break away from even the NATO. NATO has a North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So it's a bad precedent. I think regardless of the challenges that came with the Union, the UK could have survived in it. First, you said you didn't want to be part of the Schengen Agreement. They okayed it. You said you wouldn't open your borders. They okayed it. You stuck to the pound sterling. They okayed it. And I think they were making, too many demands. So I think this is the final straw.
We want to be outside but inside.
No, the point is that I wouldn't look at it.
And up to this time, they want to enjoy from the goodies of
Exactly.
EU. So Angela Merkel told them in the face at the meeting yesterday, there is no you've crossed the Rubicon.
Yes.
It was a deliberate decision you took.
That's right.
So therefore, let's expedite.
Rather, I think this would spur us on to learn from the mistakes of Europe. In some of my articles, I have always warned the AU that we are looking at a continentalist, sentimentalist approach to our union in Africa, which is wrong. There must be something that should glue us together. But just by geographical location and by no other criteria, we just put 54 countries together, 53 now, say let's unite. And the amorphous kind of rules and regulations. So this is the time for us to now look at the EU and say, look, it were better if we had the building blocks to a continental union. For example, why don't we strengthen the ECOWASs, the SADCs, and the whatnots, So I believe we are now going to learn from the EU and say, hey, look. And again, I think if you analyze it very well, you see that it was just sentimental. It was just on the spur of the moment. It's like people were not thinking about the outcomes. Yes. And there is a slowdown in the British economy now, a big slowdown. In a simple economics, you know that when there is such slowdown, within 18 months, if you don't bounce back, it will take you a minimum of 3 years to bounce back. If you don't bounce back, then heaven knows where you'll be going. Yeah. So we'll all be watching how it plays out. And I believe integrationists in Africa should be watching this and warning how we should build our integration.
And I find it difficult to envisage how the UK can stand on its own and deal with all these blocks. Because I was
going to say that, you see, because the UK is such a big market, and that all these big car makers make a lot of money in the UK, I mean, are they going to say, well, because you're not part, I'm not going to bring my cars there anymore? I mean, 1 in every 5 BMWs is sold in the UK. I mean,
that will not happen because there is going to be a realignment, a new kind of trade negotiations, trade rules, laws, and like bilateral kind of relationship between Britain and those markets.
Okay.
For example, there's now going to be, let me remind you of Tony Blair's period. The Chinese onslaught onto all markets in the world was infuriating to Tony Blair. And he got up to warn the Chinese and decided that they would want to enter into some negotiation. That was also in 1993 or 90 something. I've forgotten. But the British Commissioner for Foreign Affairs for the EU, she is a British citizen, but the Commissioner for Foreign Affairs just told Tony Blair, you have no right. It's like there is a collective EU-China relationship. Why do you want to break off? So this, for example, now creates the opportunity for Britain to have their own foreign policy, foreign relations, foreign trade relations, foreign industrial relations.
And I associate myself with that point.
They can sell bent bananas now. You know,
whatever.
In the policy, you can only sell straight bananas. If your banana, for any chance, gets bent,
if it's convoluted now, they can still negotiate.
So now you can negotiate.
Yes, most multinational companies are headquartered in London.
That's right.
So people fear there could be capital flight. Because certainly if you can't house Chinese workers that work for a big multinational company, then where do they stay? We would rather move it to another European capital. And Doc, I stand to be corrected. Most of what the UK produces is fed to the European market.
Exactly.
You can't point to anything. Nana, your watch is not from the UK. Your shoes are not from the UK.
No.
So the ready market for UK products...
Actually, my shoes from UK.
The ready market for most UK products is the immediate ecosystem. So therefore, they may stand to lose just the plummet in their economy. But another advantage that could come with this, and this is, you know, it could be diametrically opposite. It's either there is a complete downturn or they stand to benefit. 3 countries negotiate over a bottle of water. Nana takes a third, I take a third, Doc takes a third. But if I'm going to negotiate as an individual, instead of multilateral agreements, I'm now going to have bilateral agreements. They will have a China policy. They are going to have a Brazil policy. They are going to have an American policy. And so that they deal individually. Sometimes you may get the lion's share rather than divided into with other 27 countries as part of the EU. So that is the other angle. The economics may be wrong.
Yes,
the economics may be wrong, but I think they stand to benefit when they cut deals directly with major powers around the world.
The fallacy of that argument lies in pure economics and the economics of integration. A huge animal glued together by some common trends in a treaty, putting their economies together. A EU economy negotiating with China, with an EU market, not the 80 million or whatever it is British market.
Yes, Doc.
The EU always has an advantage.
Yes, Doc.
And that is why China has an advantage all the time in all fields because of population. And that is why all foreign direct investment. Last year, China took 37% of all foreign direct investment in the world. 37%. So you can imagine that when people want to go and establish, they may not want to establish in Britain. They may want to establish in Brussels or any other place where the synergies allow them to expand better.
Yes, Doc.
What if EU tries to undo Britain by negotiating differently and that kind of thing?
Yeah.
So the only thing is if UK tries to, excuse me to say, prostitute itself a little by trying to lower the barriers to, but they will suffer again because their basic market is the EU. So what they need to do is, if they trigger the Article 50, to quickly find a way of being a fair country. They are now a fair country where EU is concerned.
Exactly.
In integration, is a discriminatory kind of arrangement where any other person who is not part of the union does not enjoy anything of the union. So,
including security?
Everything. Because integration allows for non-economic advantages like managing security together, managing immigration. You know, those are the things, non-economic. Now, like he said, now your security, you are going to be alone. And I tell you, the next generation of people in Europe generally is the generation to watch, because it's a generation which is not typically European, where multiculturalism is also not working, And then the era of, what do you call it, nationalism is clearly kicking against or hitting itself against the ISIS menace or the jihadism menace.
Okay.
So the new generation in Europe, having calmly taken in about 3 million people, we're going to have security problems in Europe very high. Now, very, very high.
Let's touch on briefly before I do EPA. At the moment, if everybody who comes into Europe, I'm sure about 70–80% want to come to the UK.
Yeah.
Anybody who lands in the shores of anywhere in Europe, you just head to UK, and luckily because of the sea, you are stuck in France. So there's this wire mesh that you're stuck behind there. Now, is France going to keep this wire mesh, or is he just going to say, well, if you want to go, hop on it and go?
No, I think Doc will come in with much more authoritative analysis on this. I think breaking away doesn't make you antithetical or antagonistic to the collective good of the continent. Certainly, Europe will not be sabotaging the UK. So whatever security arrangements exist, the barbed wires, whatever cordons or layers of security will be there. But it depends upon how they deal with the influx of migrants. And Germany seems to be a bit more receptive than other countries. So how do you stop it from source? People now want to stop it in Libya because before people reach Lampedusa. So therefore, in contributing to the warships that will be, patrolling international waters, everybody will contribute as widow's mite. And in mainland Europe, where there are challenges to, I believe whatever security arrangements there are will continue to be there. And Obama sought to play down the effect of breaking away by saying the UK will find in America a very reliable ally. Yes. So at the end of the day, America has been accused of not doing enough for Europe. How many times has Obama actually gone to Europe? Apart from attending G7 and G20 meetings. So therefore, it puts UK on a certain pedestal because the trio of UK, France, and the US will always be the spearhead in waging military interventions around the world. So they will not besiege, no, they will not leave out UK in that regard. So America will come in handy to help when it is necessary. But the coziness and rapprochement that used to exist will be quite frosty.
Very ironical. USA is marking its 240th Independence Day. And UK is now breaking. I don't know whether they are now getting independence or breaking or whatever it is.
The Brexit has brought to the fore a lot of thinking and rethinking, even about democracy and about everything. But in direct answer to your question, I would think that the immigration issue has not been solved and will not be solved because Britain exited. I think those who are behind the barbed wires will be solved by Europe because of Brexit, because Britain is not, repeat, not going to open its doors. They are no longer obliged by any kind of obligatory kind of treaty.
But I think France, then I'm not going to spend money trying to stop them from hopping on the bus. Maybe you come and do it, or...
Agreed. No, Britain will not go there because now it's going to be more difficult to enter Britain from any part of the world than it used to be. Exactly. Until they find their feet and settle and know which way they want to turn their economy. But now I can't imagine Britain, we have exited, so open the doors behind the cage and let them come in. It's not going to happen. At least they could use the excuse of their toddling years in Brexit kind of this thing to
But on the subject of economy, let's move to...
but I wanted a quick thing on that, because right now what is going to happen, and which is the problem for Europe and for Britain, is what do you do with citizenship, European citizenship? Because of that, there were people who were staying in, or who are still staying in the UK and working in France or working in Germany. You just take the tube, 1 hour you are in Paris or anywhere, working, 5 p.m. you get back. What is the status of these people? And then there are several immigrants who don't have papers, left, right, center, and who by European rules and regulations could stay one way or the other, some of them in enjoying the welfare things that we were talking about. What happens to them? And already, as soon as the vote came in June 23rd, from 24th onwards, there are hate crimes against, especially the Eastern Europeans.
Exactly.
And these are the issues rather that are more serious, and one doesn't know where the pendulum will swing. And that
frankly,
is the problem.
I don't know what the Brits intend. You can't have an all-Caucasian Britain where there are no colored people.
No, but you see, I say this, and I'm coming back to it again, and I think it's good to be humane towards anybody who's seeking an asylum, but to directly tell the owner of the land that you step down because the asylum seeker now has more points than you, you put the guy in a very difficult position. I mean, it's like I come to your house. And well, that's it. My children are not eating because he's come. Every day I come, my children are not eating. He's come.
Without really stopping you, that is why I said it has given a dent to the understanding of democracy altogether. In fact, I chanced upon an article written by one professor, and he's now questioning what democracy is all about. He started by talking about even the vote itself. That at times we say majority carries the vote. Does it make sense? Number two, if 71% turnout is what we have, and it is 52 to 48, then that 52% translates into 36% of people who didn't want to go. Is that democratic? Then it comes to the rules and regulations that exist before the Brexit, some of which you are bringing out. Is it the fault of Hamidou, who has 8 children, and is it his fault? That's what the law says, and that's democracy. So it's something.
You can fine-tune the system. You can fine-tune the system.
I want us to look at EPA, got the effect on Ghana.
That's right.
Now, we have to sign EPA. Britain is out. And most of our yams and all these things,
they go to the UK.
So, I mean, our hands still tied, or we can say, look, and Ivor Greenstreet said yesterday, look, me, I'm going to, if I give me the power, I'm going to join Nigeria. And we stand together and negotiate. I'm not going to sign. Right. So I want to comment on that.
Well, the EPA has traveled a long way. We rushed to sign the interim agreement. I do not think that, like the British people, we have been able to mainstream the questions around EPA properly. Those of us who were against and are still against the signing of the EPA the way it was, we still stand by it. But it is not going to change anything. We signed with the EU, and the EU is not dead. If our goods are going to China, they will go to China. So let's assume that Britain is now a kind of China somewhere. And all we have to do is to renegotiate our trade relationship with Britain. But the EPA, if we have signed or we haven't signed and we are prepared to be signed, nothing around the EPA would change. Absolutely nothing would change.
No, they gave us a time frame where if you don't sign...
By 1st October.
By 1st October. Last year.
Yeah,
they gave us an extension.
Yes, I was the last year one.
Yeah.
That they kept postponing because the voices against it, they are invoking the spirit of a certain clause. But that clause is now...
But UK is our market. I mean, blue skies, everybody, the yams, the Kobe, the King.
They will still go. They will still go under new different dispensation.
Yeah, they will, but the UK wants to negotiate on its own terms.
Exactly.
And would it be better for us, or is because you see, I was against the EPA because the market was just too big, and somewhere in the clause where somebody can come from Sweden and also come and tender. So if Kolebu wants beds, Sweden bed manufacturing company can just come in and tender. How do you compete? He's making the beds. You are going to buy from him to come and sell.
No, that's the minor aspect of it. And our negotiators, we've been talking. I remember very well being very vociferous against it. The point is this, that the EPAs emanate from Article 23, the exception clause of the WTO. Nobody's looking at that. It did not give chance for individual countries to be negotiating this. It's for differentiation, discrimination, and development, 3 Ds. So you are discriminating, you are differentiating, and therefore it will help develop. You have to show that this is a thing. If this is what the case is, then it's going to help integration because it will help units to, it is from FTA to FTA. Yeah. We abandoned that. We started negotiating as FTAs, and Europe knew it, and they started creating their own FTAs. For example, they wanted to sign with ESA, which did not exist in Africa. East and Southern Africa. Then they wanted to sign with South Africa alone. They wanted to sign with Nigeria alone. So it's like they abandoned the very principle of the Doha development agenda. And nobody is talking about that. Our governments are looking at the easy, quick fixes and whatnot. But let me tell you, the SAT Center had made a very good research. And they had come out with what Ghana would gain between now and the year 2020. From 2020 onwards, will be a Brexit.
Ghana exit. We sure would vote to remain rather than leave, Doc.
I think there was an interview that was seen on one of these foreign news channels, and they were speaking to one of the hotel magnates. I didn't catch the name, but he said in the service industry, 60% came from outside. 35% of doctors were not from UK.
That's right.
And 50% of nurses are not from UK.
That's right.
So he was saying, look, let us hasten slowly on this immigration business, because they are keeping this country on whichever planet that you think you are. It's not necessarily from people from UK.
That's right.
You know, and he was worried that, listen, so the guy was questioning with him like, are you worried like in employment? He says, yes, I am.
Yes.
Because the average UK man doesn't want to come and sweep all night or mop the floors. These guys are prepared to do it.
The best of the UK comes from outside the UK.
Yes.
You've mentioned harder stuff. Even with football, in Premiership, the UK is rated high, but when it stands up against any of the European countries, it got kicked out yesterday by Iceland.
This Mugabe joke came out. The UK has been kicked out twice of Europe in a week. Who is coming up with all these Mugabe jokes?
So the strength...
They've been kicked out of the EU twice in a week.
There was another joke I read that he said, no African country can make it to the Euro 2016.
Yeah.
Because there's an empty slot now.
Rwandan sports minister made his wife a sports minister.
That's
his opening speech says, the problem of football is the whole of Africa. That's why no African team made it to the UEFA.
So the reality check is going to dawn on them that this was a mammoth misstep they have taken. But theirs is quite a resilient economy. Doc says it's given them between 18 months to 3 years to be able to...
It was a big slump, though, in the market.
Yes.
And the stocks all over the world. The uncertainty surrounding anything like this create a kind of wait-and-see attitude. And that's why there's going to be a slump. No huge factories are going to retool their factories straight away or go for huge bank loans with it. So there's going to be a slowdown, whether they like it or not. That slowdown was to be expected. But that they didn't plan towards it. In fact, Britain and the government and everybody, nobody was expecting that vote. So it's like the government itself wants to have a wait and see, because David Cameron is saying, I'm not going to trigger the Article 50. I'm waiting for my successor to come and do it.
I mean, do you agree with him stepping down?
Oh, yes. Yes, I drop my hat for him.
That's the difference between
he has a policy.
White leaders
I'm
and
leading
black
you
ones.
Through this policy to this end. Somewhere along the way, you say you don't like where I'm going. The only legitimate and rightful thing to do was to resign, and he has resigned. He is a statesman, a real statesman. Even before that, I respected him because of the way he told his own ministers and his own party people, feel free to talk about this thing for or against. I won't crank the party discipline. I mean, feel free. If you think we should go out, feel free. Very rare. Very, very, very
And I
rare.
think African leaders should...
We are party proposed that no.
African leaders should take a cue from
Sure.
it. Here, there is
cue from what?
Here there is a scandal. The minister stand aside. No, the person wants... Look, leadership qualities are holistic.
Yeah.
If you don't believe, if you don't buy into the idea I have, the vision I have for UK as being an integral part of Europe, then it means it's an indictment on all other leadership credentials I have. And so I'm going to lay down my tools, let some other person continue. I think that is a test of character for a leader like Cameron.
Jerry Corbyn, who's the leader of the opposition, i.e. the Labour Party.
He doesn't want to resign, but people say he should resign.
About 15 of his cabinet said, look.
And he's finding it difficult to replace them, and he would eventually. I can believe that he will eventually resign.
Today in Parliament, David Cameron actually told him in the face, why don't you just go, man?
Yes.
Yeah.
He's got to go.
In the UK, when you fail people once, you have to move on. Ed Miliband failed the Labour and he had to move on.
Let me put my Ghanaian hat on. Look, I am president. And I said that, listen, when I come, I'm going to put you into UK. And then somewhere along the line, he said, no, we don't want to go to UK anymore. Fine, I'm still the president. I won't take you to UK.
No, absolutely not.
No, he will say,
that's not good leadership.
I'm leaving you so that you decide whichever country. If it is Lome in Togo, you want to go, then go there.
The person becomes a hero if the choice people have made is wrong. There will be nostalgia for the person, even though he may not come back.
Exactly.
Or if this person were there. Or now where the person was taking us. You know, there is always power in the absence of somebody who is right. The power of the absence of a good leader is always very, very strong. Yeah. Why were we all, almost every party is craving for Nkrumah. You know. Yeah. And I always say this thing, my friend of mine from the NPP said, we don't, I said, don't make a mistake. President Kufuor mentioned Kwame Nkrumah more than any other CPP person mentioned. So everybody is craving for the power of the absence of the man. Okay. So the exit of Cameron, together with Brexit, is the best choice.
On that note, stay tuned. We're coming straight back. Well, thank you very much for staying, and we are looking at Brexit. And just before the break, we're talking about how gallant, David Cameron, who's currently the Prime Minister. And for those of you who don't know, in the UK, you don't vote for quote-unquote president. Whoever wins the majority seat in Parliament, you nominate the leader, then he becomes the Prime Minister. So that's how they do this.
The only caveat is that the Prime Minister must also win his seat.
Yeah, in Parliament. Yeah, you have to win. So if here it would have been Alban Bagbin.
Yeah, exactly.
Would have been the Prime Minister.
Party leader
becomes the Prime Minister. But you have to win your seat in your local. Yeah. So that's how it works. And since 2010 till recently, that we have been told that David is leaving. But you see, if you look at the UK that Gordon Brown left and the UK that David Cameron is leaving, he's worked his socks off.
Marked contrast.
He's worked his socks off.
Marked contrast.
I think you could also attribute that to the fact that the UK and the Cameron was inward looking. And Doc, we saw less wars, less UK. It is France and the US that have been leading the charge, apart from in Libya, where there was a collaboration amongst those countries. And so he was inward looking. He was quite missing on many of their adventures. So they had more time to think about how they could tailor those things that would be, helpful to the development of the United Kingdom. He didn't follow this grand global, enterprise of trying to make the UK influential in other countries. And mind you, apart from bequeathing a very beautiful language called English and maybe football, there is very little the UK does in terms of financial assistance to governments around the world and governments in the third world. So there isn't that stress and strain on what meager resources they have compared to other countries that are much more adventurous and want to stamp their authority in other countries. So therefore, inward looking, and then they looked at those areas where there were weaknesses to strengthen them. Gordon Brown was always following, the US. So therefore, I think that could have contributed to the success story of
that being the case, that's quite true. But unlike Gordon Brown, Cameron was both looking inward and at the same time did not shirk his responsibilities outside. He was still strong with NATO. He was using the DFID everywhere to ensure that all those things that Britain has been doing stood firm. And I think under him, the DFID has been very strong around the world. And so, yes, inward looking, but he was that pragmatist, somebody who cut his coat according to his size.
Because I was just going to say that Gordon Brown had a policy that, look, I'll borrow my way out of this recession.
That's right.
So they were borrowing to see that if something will kickstart.
Yeah.
And then when David Cameron came, he says, no
way.
No way. If you haven't earned it, you don't spend it.
You don't spend it.
And I was giving an example, like the Harrow Barrow, you know, like they go to get their budget because the barrow will be like a district, right?
Yeah.
And it's been cut by 75 million pounds. And
Make do with it.
they are told directly, don't touch education. Go.
Serious austerity measures.
Yeah.
Austerity
So
measures.
at one point, you know, the Harrow and like Wembley are sharing a hospital. Instead of, Harrow having
here,
one here,
one
one here. No, put one in the middle so that we share. So
we have a lot to learn from such a
And
situation.
for essential services, I believe so well you can cut back on those things that are non-essential. Something like education and health, I believe so well they are so essential. You just cannot.
No, in their austerity, they were cutting help. They were even cutting, police stations were closing. So you go there at 5 o'clock and they tell you, go to South Harrow.
To report a case?
Yeah, if you have a case, go to South Harrow. This one is shut. They open at 6 o'clock.
I see.
Everything. They were sweeping every other day instead of every day. And every position that comes with secretary and cars and 3 cars, they ask you, my brother, do you want to stay with all these? Do you want to stay without these things, or you want to go because of your pride? Some stayed without their cars and all the fanciful things. Some thought, no, me, I'm a big man, so I'll go. But in other ways, they didn't have the money to spend.
It's because voting does not depend on how much lagis you share, how much freebies you give to the population. He is unlucky not to have been born in Ghana.
Somebody asked a good question here. Oh, does it mean they're going to join a new continent now? Does it mean they'll join a new continent? Well, I think you have to find out they're going to join somewhere.
They'll still be on the continent.
So let me see this one.
But you know, excuse me, Nana, to that question, it's like they wouldn't join any continent. They'll have to realign themselves with Europe. You know, I think, is it Switzerland? Switzerland and Norway have a special relationship with Europe. There are only 4 basic things that Europe has told them that you can't change. And so you can realign yourself with Europe. Even though Switzerland and Norway are part of the European Union, they have a special kind of relationship. They are not inside the way that people
So
think.
the UK could have stayed and then thrown its weight about.
Exactly, like Norway.
and Iceland.
Yeah, you could stay and then throw your weight about based upon the kind of, the strength of your bargaining chip. You would be an integral part, whether, albeit nominally, but you would be part of it. But this severance of relations entirely, for me, was the wrong.
But I think the analogy you gave was the best, that in the heat of anger, you just at times decide to divorce your wife or you divorce your husband. Exactly. That's a very good analogy you gave, because the Brits were just angry over something and then they decided to, come on. It's like the Chi proverb says, Woody wants to share brew.
Let me catch up this. They said, though the chips are falling on Brexit after the referendum, I am of the strongest conviction that there would have been a rethink following subsequent discussions. Undoubtedly, the effects of Britain itself and other countries with nationals in there like Ghana would be felt, but it may be at a snail pace, because most of EU companies that form a chunk of the British companies would repatriate, and the effect may be obvious. With this decision, Ghana is predictably very close to signing the EPA. The consequences may be dire, but it would be painfully felt in the long run. The world is indeed a funny place. For Berima Kubaji in Jene. One day I'm going to go and visit Berima Kubaji in Jene. Let's see what is on. That's the same message. Hold on.
Jene is near Tuobodom, right?
Tiobodom, Jene is close to Tiobodom.
In the song, it was in the song, isn't it?
You know about the song.
You see now. Nana, thanks for updating us on this issue with our panelist Ibad, my good friend, and Doctor. They are doing a great job, and God bless you all. There are a couple of messages like this. I like Ibad Ibrahim, because he knows things on the ground.
That's right.
And I'm really enjoying today's show because your guests are super. You see, my guests love you. I need to get it. It's difficult getting them. No, I think you are dodging the question. What effect does it have on Ghana?
No, the best is, I've already said that nothing substantial is going to change. We'll feel the effect, economic effect, because Britain will run down a little. But the point is this, that most of our trade is anchored on the dollar. And therefore, would you feel that the crunch, where British economy is slumping a little?
Yeah.
And as I've said, between 18 months and 3 years, we'll now see the full impact. So it's not going to affect anything substantial in Ghana. The only thing that we'll have to wait patiently and see how UK realigns itself with Europe. And then it defines the contours of our relationship also, either with Britain or with Europe.
But at the moment, they need to find their feet before they even go anywhere.
Exactly.
The whole political front is in disarray.
It's in disarray, yes.
And what do you think about?
But of course, the Ghanaians should.
Boris as Prime Minister?
Oh, Boris Johnson. Man, it's a no for me.
But Ghanaians
Just like Donald Trump for the US. It's a no for me. It will be a deadly deal if Boris becomes UK Prime Minister and Trump wins in the US.
The number you want is 024-366-2001, 024-366-2001. They make my shirts for the show, and they're doing a 10%, so give them a call if you want. Wherever you are in the country, they can deliver. 024-366-2001.
I'm not going to call, but I demand one.
Sure. Really, my hands are tied. Deal. Okay, so thank you very much, gentlemen. Tomorrow we're back to do this all over again. Thank you.